Hello and welcome to this HESES training video. In this video we're going to look at recording fundability status in the HESES workbook, and we'll recap some context to help us do that. We're going to look at home fee status and how that affects whether or not something is OFS fundable or non-fundable. Then we're going to look at equivalent or lower qualifications and also the fundability of some subcontracted provision. To give this some context, it's worth making clear that the OFS does not fund individual students. We fund teaching activity at eligible providers. We count years of engagement as a proxy measure for this activity. But not all years of engagement are OFS fundable, and this is reflected in the headings seen in the HESES workbook. Let's just take a step back to see where we are in the big picture. I'm showing this slide again so that we can keep track of where we are. We've been exploring the way that we classify students that we're counting in HESES, and that's those in the highlighted box in the bottom left of the screen. Now we're going to use that one as the top level in a new diagram, which is going to be on the next slide. Because HESES splits those students to be counted in the workbook into two groups by looking at the fees the students are entitled to pay. And as you can see on the second level here, that split is between those students that are entitled to pay home fees and those from overseas. Those are non-fundable. But this doesn't mean that all home fee students are fundable. Hence the split that you can see on the bottom layer. We'll come to that shortly, but first let's define what home fee means. Annex F in the guidance is the place where this is all laid out. It says that if a student is eligible under the student support regulations, in HESES they are home fee. Note that the regulations referenced by Annex F do change from time to time. For example, from the 1st of August 2022, changes to legislation expanded the categories of students eligible for home fee status. Note also that these regulations may also include some EU students covered by the withdrawal arrangements. And further changes in recent years are laid out in our changes documents, so that should always be referred to. Also refer to Student Finance England, or that's SFE regulations, for full details. Overseas means those falling outside the definition of home fee status. However, although we don't fund overseas students' activities, we still need to know about them on HESES. See Annex F of the HESES guidance for all the further details, and this will refer you to the Education Fees and Awards England Regulations 2007, Statutory Instrument 2007 number 779 as amended. And to make it clear here, the point we're labouring here is that the HESES guidance is not the definitive definition. This is the fee regulations linked to from Annex F, the SFE regulations. Okay, remember that we are deciding on whether student study activity is fundable by the OFS and establishing first whether they have home fee status. This is the first part of that. However, as we said earlier, not all home fee study activity is fundable, and so we need to work out what is and what is not. Basically, we can summarize things like this. Study activity is OFS fundable for home fee students unless they are in one of the non-fundable categories listed in Annex F of the guidance. These are students aiming for equivalent or lower qualifications, ELQs, unless they're exempt. Students taught under subcontractual arrangement by providers that are not in the approved fee cap category of the OFS register, unless they are on certain NMAR courses. Initial teacher training leading to QTS or EYTS and INSET students. Certain courses commissioned and funded by an NHS organisation. Postgraduate taught students funded by another public source. Students on closed courses, although this doesn't apply to students on apprenticeships. And finally, undergraduate and postgraduate taught students at the Open University who are domiciled in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. It will be useful to say more about the first two of these. ELQ, which is perhaps the most common, is first, so let's talk about that a little bit more. ELQs, or more properly equivalent or lower qualifications, are when students are aiming for a qualification that is at the same level or lower than one that they have already achieved. So generally these are non-fundable, but there are some exceptions. HESES Guidance Annex F has the full list, but examples are foundation degrees, postgraduate certificates in education, PGCEs, students in receipt of disabled students' allowances, and there are a number of health-related courses as well. If you don't know a student's prior qualifications, you should treat them as aiming for an ELQ, so they would be non-fundable unless exempt. Some things here to note about ELQs. Students can be aiming for more than one qualification as part of the same course. For example, a higher national diploma, an HND, and a degree. For ELQ purposes, assess their status against the lower qualification. ELQ is a concept also used by some other organisations, but be aware that the definitions may not be exactly the same as ours. Moving on to subcontracted provision. We've already spoken in another video about the nature of subcontractual relationships, and this is covered in Annex A, which gives guidance on partnerships. Now, they could be validation arrangements, but here we're looking at the other main type, subcontracted provision. The HESES survey is to be completed by providers that have students registered with them in the relevant academic year. Now, this includes students taught at other providers under subcontractual arrangements. Students taught in this way should only be recorded as OFS fundable if the subcontracted provider is in the approved fee cap category of the OFS register. All others should be recorded as non-fundable unless they are on certain NMAR courses. See Annex F for full details. We have a number of resources for providers, and we'll look at the main ones here, but we will also highlight additional resources as we go through this series of recordings. For a high-level view of OFS funding, see our Finance and Funding page, www.officeforstudents.org.uk/for-providers/finance and funding, with the last two parts of that URL having the words hyphenated. For an overview of recurrent funding specifically, add the hyphenated words recurrent funding to the last URL, or perhaps an easier way is to use the search function on our main web page and enter recurrent funding. For more detail about funding, see our annual guide to funding, and you can search for that term on our website to find the latest edition. The best place to start for HESES resources is the main HESES page on the OFS website, which can be found at www.officeforstudents.org.uk/HESES, and of course that is HESES. To stay informed about OFS announcements, including those relating to funding, you can sign up for our email alert service. Visit www.officeforstudents.org.uk/sign up for email alerts, and as usual, the last part of that URL is hyphenated. Thank you for listening and watching.